The Mira Hotel in Kowloon, Hong Kong is exquisitely designed. It's like the inside of a sailing ship. Everything has a place, and everything is in its place. I actually find myself opening and closing the little drawers just to see the intricate way they're fitted together. I can't help it. It's just the way I'm wired. And I head down to the lobby of the Mira Hotel in Kowloon, Hong Kong, and I step out into a 21st century Hong Kong monsoon season night. The air is so thick with moisture that it's smearing the ubiquitous neon, like we've all just done a little bit of LSD. And I'm walking down the streets, and even though it's after midnight, there are hundreds of people on every block. And there's this humid sort of animal smell, the smell of humans in close proximity to one another, a smell we've all almost entirely forgotten. And a few blocks down from the Mira Hotel in Kowloon, Hong Kong, sits the Chungking Mansions. The Chungking Mansions are a wretched hive of scum and villainy. They sit in the heart of Kowloon. They are nothing more and nothing less than a mall of iniquities. Anything you want to get that you probably aren't supposed to have, you can find in the Chungking Mansions after midnight. And I'm there walking up and down the aisles. It's like globalism in action. It's like a pirate-themed Benetton ad. Sub-Saharan Africans with tribal scars are getting into arguments over garbage bags filled with second-hand cell phones. Mainlanders are debating with Koreans over some mysterious root. And in an Indian food stall, there are stacks and stacks of tiffins and an off-brand Slurpee machine called a Slurvee. And in all of this, I am the only minority, because I'm white and large, and I'm wearing a Hawaiian shirt. Because you get to a certain point when you realize you just aren't going to fit in. You get to a certain point and you realize it might just be advantageous to just Columbo yourself right into the middle of a situation. I've been doing this a long time. It's a kind of professional blundering. I just kind of go, what? Excuse me, ma'am. I don't mean to bother you. You get in the most interesting situations that way. It doesn't help you get back out of them again, but it does make for an interesting life. And I make my way up to the third floor of the Chungking Mansions, which is where things start getting a little sketchy. And in the course of half an hour, I am offered hashish, opium, heroin, sex with women, sex with men, and sex in a combination only described as delightful. And I decline all of these offers because that is not what I'm here for. I find what I'm looking for in a far corner of that third floor, next to a rack of cut-rate papayas. There's this booth. And in this booth, on strands of fishing wire, are hundreds and hundreds of cell phones, as though they've been caught by some fisherman. And in a sense, they have, because the man in the booth is seated at a workbench. He's got a cell phone with the back popped off in front of him, and he's got a huge soldering gun in one hand and a large magnifying glass over his left eye. And when I approach, his eye looms at me enormously. And I speak to him in the only international language I know. I say, iPhone? And when he hears this, he smiles. And there's his gold tooth. And he reaches under the counter and he pulls out an iPhone, except it's not an iPhone. You can tell right away from the packaging. The kerning on the fonts is all fucked up. And then when you open it, the phone itself is a pretty good copy. But when you turn it on, instead of the graceful swoop of icons onto the screen, these icons stagger on. Like they've all just gotten drunk in Kowloon. And when you press one of them, instead of a photorealistic address book, a big blue window pops up with the words, "Error is making." And I hand back the iPhone and I show him what I mean. I take out my iPhone. And when he sees it, he understands, and he reaches out his hand, and I take my baby, and I place it into his hand. And he takes a grimy dock cable and he jams it into the bottom of my phone, and his screens light up. Because this man is a pirate. He's a hacker, a jailbreaker, an unlocker, a person you go to fiddle with the baseband of your phone, a person who writes tailored viruses to crack your phone open and give it back to you again. Because you might not know this, but there's a war going on right now over all those devices in your pockets. A war over who owns them. You probably think you own them. Why? Because you paid for them? Silly. Corporations would see it differently. The corporations would say that those devices run on their networks, and so they should control them. And there's a war going on right now, back and forth, over who will own these devices. And in a war like that, there's a small percentage to be made by pirates, like this one, who give people back ownership of the things they thought they already owned. And as he works, we talk back and forth in broken English, and I ask him if it's hard to stay ahead of Apple and Nokia and Samsung and all the different technology makers who are always building up their defenses that the pirates then have to tear back down. And he smiles, and there's that gold tooth, and he gestures. A grand gesture that seems incongruous in this tiny space, and for a moment, he doesn't look like a hacker in the Chungking mansions. He looks like a warrior prince, and these are all his subjects. He smiles, as if to say, "It's me against Apple. Who do you think is going to win?" My only hobby is technology. I love technology. I love everything about it. I love looking at technology. I love comparing one piece of technology to another. I love reading rumors about technology that doesn't exist yet. I love browsing technology. I love buying technology. I love opening technology. Even when it's in that bubble packaging, I love it. I love the smell of a new piece of technology, that sort of burnt PVC smell that happens when you run electricity through it for the first time. I love it. And of all the kinds of technology that I love in the world, I love the technology that comes from Apple the most. Because I am an Apple aficionado, I am an Apple partisan, I am an Apple fanboy, I am a worshiper in the cult of Mac. I have been to the House of Jobs. I have walked through the stations of his cross, and I have knelt before his throne. And like so many of you who may be members of this religion with me, you know that it can be hard at times to keep the faith, and I have strayed now and again. Like many of you, I indulged in the Linux heresies, and in the late 90s I did sleep with a Windows system or two, but really, who didn't? But for the most part, I have been faithful, and we speak here tonight of the operating system as a religion, because I submit to you, how could it be otherwise? When so much of our lives in this day and age are mediated by technology, I say to you, if you control the metaphor through which people see the world, then you control the world itself. What I'm saying to you is, if you have never thought ever in a deep way about your choice of operating systems, you may be living an unexamined life. And when I was young, I dreamed of the future, and we knew what the future was going to be. We knew that the future was going to be cyberspace. And we knew exactly how it was going to work. We were all going to have ports. Big fucking ports in the base of our skulls. And we would take these giant stereo jacks and be like, I'm jacking in, motherfucker! And we would jack into cyberspace. Thank God that never happened. Can you imagine? Having a port at the base of your skull, having software running at the base of your skull, at the quality level that software is written at these days. Oh, sorry, man. Oh, no. I can't come over, man. The left side of my visual field is crashing over and over again. No, I booted into safe mode, but it won't fucking stop. Now I'm on hold with tech support. Oh, it's happening again. I gotta go. Or however you hang up an eye in the future. But thank God that never happened, right? Except it did. It did happen. Because the future never arrives the way we expect it to. That's why it's called the future. And right now, out there in the darkness, each and every one of you, almost each and every one of you, has a device in your pocket that is more powerful than the most powerful personal computer from 10 or 12 years ago. And it is connected to a worldwide network of information that you can send to and receive from at will. What I'm saying is we are cyborgs already. The future already happened. And if my time with Apple has taught me anything, it has taught me that to be in love with Apple is to be a little bit in love with heartbreak itself, because they break your heart again and again. Because Steve Jobs was the master of the forced upgrade. Just when you think all of your systems are finally working out, just when you think everything is finally in alignment, not only in their capabilities, but also aesthetically, just when you think everything you own can finally speak to one another, he fucks you. I remember there was one week in 1999, I looked at all of my systems and I thought, oh my God, it's perfect! Everything I own is bulbous and fruit-colored. This will never go out of style. But it did. Steve Jobs was so good at telling us the story we long to hear, the story of a future where technology actually works. I've never been to that place. I really want to go. And when the devices rise up on their glass pillars, as though they were born from the mind of Jobs himself, as though he was walking down the street and all of a sudden he went, oh, an iPad, and oh, there it is. They're so beautiful. He was so good at making us need things we never even knew we wanted. Like I never knew I needed a laptop so thin I could slice a sandwich with it. I didn't know that, but then I saw it and I wanted it. And there are those of you out there in the darkness right now watching me thinking, Mike, use a knife. But I would say to you that in a better designed world, I would only need one tool, the tool that Steve has given me. And when I watch the keynotes, I'm filled with this curious combination of lust and geekery. I stare into the screen, and I have one big window open with the live stream running, showing the devices being introduced, and then I have multiple other windows open filled with chat rooms, where men also in their underwear sit in their apartments all over the world typing furiously. And when I rise up, transformed afterwards, I go into the other room of my apartment, where my wife is, who is, I should note, a more normal person. And I try to explain to her what it is I have seen, and it is like I'm speaking Egyptian. I want a new router. I want a new router because our current router is 802.11.g. Pathetic. Gee, it's so slow. I can't believe how slow it is. I didn't even know until a few minutes ago how slow it is. But now that I know, I can't even look at the fucking thing. I just want to rip it out of our systems and smash it against the toilet and flush it away. The new router, the new router is 802.11.n. N is fast! With N, we'll finally be able to do everything they always said we could. With N, we'll finally be able to stream high-definition video wirelessly across our apartment through our RAID array server. And there is a rational voice inside of my head going, Mike, you do not own a RAID array server. You do not stream any high definition video. The only thing you use your router for is to download web pages from the internet. And I speak to that voice and I tell that voice to shut up because I want it. Because it is small and white and square and has perfect Bauhaus inspired design. And before we go too much further here tonight, I think we should speak for a moment about the nature of geekishness. Because geeks are a little bit like lowland gorillas. They fight for dominance. And out there in the darkness, I feel almost certain that there's someone who believes they are geekier than me. They're sitting out there in the darkness, even now, watching me, thinking, I don't think he knows anything about Steve Jobs. I have a tattoo of Steve Jobs on the base of my skull. When I have a USB thumb drive that doesn't work the way I want it to, I like to write my own drivers for it in machine code. You win. You are geekier than me. You out there in the darkness. If you made it out of your apartment this evening. But I do think it's important to understand where I sit in that hierarchy for the purposes of our story. So the best way I know how to describe my level of geekishness is to say that I'm at the level of geekishness where to relax after performances like this one. Sometimes I will go back to my apartment and I will field strip my MacBook Pro into its 43 component pieces. I will clean them with compressed air and then I will put them back together again. It soothes me. So the truth is, I never would have questioned this religion. I never would have looked deeply at this belief system because it gave me so much pleasure if it hadn't been for the pictures. Because one day I was relaxing on the internet, which for me means reading Macintosh news sites, which I should specify have no actual news in them. They're instead filled with rumors about what Apple will do next, written exclusively by people who have no fucking idea what Apple will do next. But for some reason, I find this soothing. So I'm reading one of these news sites when this article gets posted, and it's about the fact that somebody bought an iPhone, and when they got it, it wasn't blank. It still had information on it from inside the factory. In fact, on the camera roll, there were photos from inside the factory, and they posted these photos into the article, and I looked at these photos, and they took my breath away. They're not very good photos. I mean, they're just testing that the camera on the phone works, you know, they're not actually of anything, but I'll never forget them. There were 4 of them. The first one was a stack of pallets, wooden pallets, all stacked up. The second was a conveyor belt, the edge. The third was completely out of focus. It could just be an enormous space. And the fourth was a woman. She doesn't know her picture's being taken. She's looking off in another direction. She's wearing a clean suit. She's got no expression on her face. And I looked at these pictures, and I downloaded these pictures to my desktop, and then I put them into a folder on my desktop, and in the weeks and months that followed, I found myself returning to them over and over, almost compulsively. I would open the folder, and I would use expose, and I'd fan them out across my screen, and I would just look at them. Who are these people? Because you have to understand, I've devoted an embarrassing amount of my life to the study of these machines. I'm an amateur, but I'm a dedicated amateur. I understand as best as I can how the hardware works and how the software rests on the hardware. And in all that time, I never once thought in a dedicated way how they were made. It's difficult now to reconstruct what I did think. I think what I thought is that they were made by robots. I realized that I just took this image. I had an image in my mind that I stole from a 60 Minutes story about Japanese automotive plants, and I just copy and pasted that and was like, Command V. That's what it looks like. But smaller, because they're laptops instead of cars. I started to think about how if this phone had 4 pictures on it, taken by hand in testing, then every iPhone has 4 pictures on it, taken in testing. Every iPhone in the world, by hand. I started to think. And that's always a problem for any religion. The moment you begin to think. In the beginning, there were two Steves. And this is very important. Youngins. There was Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Thank you, brother. Amen to you. Wozniak was a geek's geek. He was sort of like a geek version of Santa Claus, very fat, very jolly, and he could code like a motherfucker. He would drink Mountain Dew, roar, and he would just stay up all night, coding, night and day and night. Serious geek, serious genius. Steve Jobs, on the other hand, was something else entirely. He wasn't even really a geek. He was more like an inventor, entrepreneur, and he loomed over the tech industry, you know. We don't have many giants like Steve Jobs nowadays. I mean, who do we have now? Ballmer at Microsoft? Ballmer's a fucking monkey. He throws chairs at his subordinates when he gets angry. Steve Jobs didn't have to do that. Steve Jobs could do that shit with his mind. If Steve Jobs even looked at a subordinate in a certain way, the subordinate would get up, go get a chair, and beat himself to death. That's power. That's real power. Jobs was adopted into a working class family. He was always driven and idiosyncratic. He went off to college and dropped out after one semester, but he stayed on campus, auditing the classes he wanted to take and surfing on other people's couches. And he began to live a kind of dual existence, half of it in the Pacific Northwest, where he went to vegan communities and took a lot of acid, and the other half in what is today known as Silicon Valley, where he became more and more obsessed with electronics. And he fused these two parts of himself together until he became kind of a techno-libertarian hippie, someone who believed passionately in the power of technology to transform all of our lives, and believed that transformation could be welded to humanist values. And he hooks up with Wozniak, and the first thing they work on together is a pirate box. It's a box that lets you steal long-distance telephone calls from the phone company. And they don't just make one of them, they make hundreds of them, and they sell them to everybody. But first they need to test it. So Jobs has Wozniak test the box by using it to place a call to the Vatican, but spoofing it so that it looks as though the call is coming from the White House. So Wozniak does this, and he says, hello, Vatican, this is the White House. I have Henry Kissinger online for the Pope. And the Cardinal, or whoever the fuck answers the phone at the Vatican in the middle of the night, says to him, His Holiness is sleeping, but please hold on. We'll go and wake him. So Wozniak goes, oh my God, don't do that! This was a mistake! I'm sorry! Don't wake the Pope! Goodbye! Because he's a regular geek, right? So he's like, hey, it fucking works! Proof of concept! Jesus Christ. Now, if Jobs had placed that call, Jobs would have said, excellent. Please go and wake him. And while I have you on the line, listen to the sound of my voice. Their next project together is the Apple I. It's a computer, but it doesn't look very much like the computer as we know it today. That's because the beginning of the personal computer revolution was more of a hobbyist movement. So if you were the type of person to get one, you were the type of person who was into ham radios and chemistry sets. And so the Apple I is just a bundle of circuit boards. It even comes with a manual that shows you exactly how it's circuited, because it's expected. You're going to want to hack it or modify it or fuck with it. It doesn't even always have a case, and it definitely always doesn't have a keyboard. And that's a feature, not a bug. Because if you're the type of person who would buy one, you're the type of person who would go, oh, there's no keyboard? You mean I get to make my own keyboard? Awesome! Now, their next project, the Apple II, is entirely different. This looks more like product. This looks like something you could go out to a store and buy. And indeed, thousands of Americans run out and buy one, and they have this brand new experience that Americans have never had before. The experience of going out, buying an incredibly expensive piece of electronics, bringing it home, setting it all up correctly, turning it on, and nothing happens. It just goes, That's because a computer, fundamentally, is an appliance. And appliances, by their nature, do one thing. Your iron irons, your blender blends, your computer computes. It executes the programs that are run on it. What's different about a computer is that it's kind of like a chameleon. It becomes whatever program is executing on it. So the value of a computer increases exponentially as more programs are written for it. And the Apple II drops at this fortuitous moment where a critical mass of Americans are starting to get into computing. And it's they, the users, the people who write the programs for the computer, they're the one who gives the computer value that make that computer a success. They come up with programs that Apple never would have thought of, like spreadsheets. People are like, yeah, you know what, it'd be great. It'd be so great if there were like spreadsheets on the computer, right? That would be so much better than these clay tablets we're using now. And so the Apple II goes on to become the best-selling computer in the history of the universe, and a mind virus starts to spread across America, infecting parents everywhere with the idea that if they do not get a computer for their child is fucked. And parents everywhere fall prey to this. They don't even know what computers do. They're just like, well, Junior, this certainly was very fucking expensive. I certainly hope you know what the fuck to do with it. And that's how I got my first computer. My first computer was the Apple IIc. It was bought for my family by my grandfather, who was fairly well off. My family was actually fairly poor, so when the Apple IIc came into our house, it was easily the most expensive thing that had ever been in our home, and it was treated with a degree of deference, as befitting something of that lineage. It was given its own room, the computer room, where it sat on its own desk, and we had to ask permission to go and speak with the computer. It was a beautiful machine. I think everything I fundamentally understand about industrial design, I learned about while looking at and working with that machine. It had this beautiful off-white platinum finish and these slits cut vertically, perfectly into the top case, and the keys had this wonderful travel to them. They were a delight to use, and the font on the keys was Garamond, a font I still feel strongly about today. And the disk drive would open and close with a satisfying. And I learned on that machine. So I started with the tutorials. I played a lot of Lemonade Stand, and I moved on to programming in BASIC and Pascal, typing in programs from magazines. And I became a writer on that machine. I and the machine learned to write together late into the night, the cold Maine night. Everyone else in the house is asleep. I would be there seated before the computer, the thoughts in my fevered brain traveling down my arms, out my fingers, into the keys, up through the computer, into the screen, and spraying back at me as light, this virtuous circle. I and the computer learning together. I remember everything about that machine. I remember how the power brick would oscillate in the middle of the night. You could hear the whine. I remember how if you wanted, you had to stack pillows on top of the printer if you wanted to print something in the middle of the night because it was dot matrix. No, seriously, it would go. And then there were these two axes that ran right through Steve Jobs' character. One is that he was passionate about design. The other was that he was ruthless in business. And the place where these two axes best intersect is the breakout story. When Apple was barely out of the garage, just starting out, Jobs goes to Wozniak and he says, listen, I got us a project. It's a rush job. We have to have it done in 72 hours. It's programming this game, Breakout, for Atari. Here's the deal. If we can make the game fit on 50 chips, then we get $700. But if we can make the game fit on 40 chips, then we get $1,000. And Wozniak hears this, and he just goes, "Whoa!" And he drinks 3 liters of Mountain Dew, and he just stays up all night, coding, day and night and day. And finally, after 3 days, he's done it. And he goes to Jobs. And he's made the game fit on 38 chips. Wow.
Mm-hmm. People at Atari don't even know how he did it. They're just like, what the fuck? What is it? What? How did he? Just I don't know how he. Just ship it. Just fucking ship it. So, it isn't until years later, when Apple is a global company and everybody involved are multi-millionaires, it isn't until then that Wozniak discovers that Steve Jobs was paid $5,000 for the project. And further, there were no conditions from Atari about the number of chips to be used. Steve Jobs just liked things to be efficient. Shenzhen is a city without history. The people who live there will tell you that, because 31 years ago, Shenzhen was a fishing village. They had little reed huts, little reed walkways between the huts. The men would fish into the late afternoon. I hear it was lovely. Today, Shenzhen is a city of 14 million people. It is larger than New York City. It is the third largest city in all of China, and it is the place where almost all of your shit comes from. And the most amazing thing is almost no one in America knows its name. Isn't that remarkable? That there's a place where almost all of our shit comes from, and nobody knows its name. I mean, we do think we know where our shit comes from, right? We think it comes from China. In kind of a generalized way, China. But it doesn't come from China. It comes from Shenzhen. It's a city, it's a place, and I am there in an elevator going down to the lobby of my hotel to meet with my translator, Kathy. Kathy is fascinating. She's very small. She has sort of rounded shoulders. She has these glasses that are way too big for her face, so she has to keep pushing them up assiduously because they keep sliding down. And she also has this sort of unnerving habit where when she's listening to you, she leans forward indeterminately. So you get the feeling that if you talk to her long enough, she would actually fall into your chest and you'd have to pick her back up again. We go outside and we get into a taxi. And we begin to drive through the streets of downtown Shenzhen. Shenzhen looks like Blade Runner threw up on itself. LEDs, neon, and 15-story high video walls covered in shitty Chinese advertising. It's everything they told us the future would be. And we get out to the edge of the core of Shenzhen, and we come to the gates. Because 31 years ago, Deng Xiaoping carved this section off from the rest of China with a big red pen. He said, this will be the special economic zone. And he made a deal with the corporations. He said to the corporations, look, use our people, do whatever you want to with our people. Just give us a modern China. And the corporations squeezed and squeezed, and what they got was the Shenzhen we find today. And on the other side of the gates, it's the factory zone, and whoa! Oh, it's like going from the Eloy to the Morlocks. I've never seen anything like it. Everything is under construction. Every road has a bypass. Every bypass has a bypass. Its bypasses all the way down. I swear to God, I see buildings being built up on one side as they're being torn down on the other. And we pull into an elevated expressway, and we begin to drive under a silver poisoned sky, because the air in Shenzhen, it's not good in Hong Kong, but when you get to Shenzhen, you can actually feel it. Like a booted foot pressing down on your chest. But it's amazing, isn't it? What human beings can get used to, because after just a few days, you hardly notice it at all. And as we are driving, we are passing by arcology after arcology. These immense buildings that are so large, they are actually redefining my sense of scale moment to moment. And then our taxi driver takes an exit ramp and he stops. Because the exit ramp stops. There's some rebar sticking out and an 80-foot drop to the ground. And the only indication that the exit ramp stops is a single solitary orange cone. It's just sitting there. As if to say, we're busy. Be alert. We back onto the expressway, we begin to drive again, and then Kathy turns to me, pushes up her glasses, and says, "Excuse me, but I do not think this is going to work." And I hasten to assure her that it will work, but I'm talking out of my ass because I don't know that it's going to work. In fact, I have a lot of evidence that it is not going to work. In fact, all the people I've talked to in Hong Kong, when I tell them about my plan, you can actually see them wrestling with just how to express to me just how totally fucked my plan is. My plan is this. We are in a taxi right now, in the factory zone, and we are driving on our way to Foxconn. Foxconn is the biggest company you've never heard of, or maybe you have. Foxconn makes almost 50% of all the electronics in the world. So if you ever want to know just how much of your shit comes from Foxconn, take all the electronics in your house, put them in a big pile, cut them in half, that's Foxconn. And at this plant, they make all kinds of things for all kinds of companies, including MacBooks and iPhones and iPads. And so my plan is to take this taxi to the main gates, and then I'm going to get out of the taxi with my translator, and then my plan is to stand at the main gates and talk to whoever wants to talk to me. And when I tell people in China about this plan, they say, "That's different. That's not usually how we do things in China. That's really a bad idea, but I don't know what else to do. I mean, I've been trying to do things the right way. I can't get anywhere. I've been working with a fixer for the BBC. All the doors are closed." And you reach a certain point when you realize you may need to obey your natural inclinations. And at the end of the day, I am white. I mean large, and white, and American, and I'm wearing a fucking Hawaiian shirt. Okay. And we are going to the main gates. But when we get there, I have to say, my resolve wavers. Because the Foxconn plant in Shenzhen is enormous. The Foxconn plant in Shenzhen has 430,000 workers. That can be a difficult number to conceptualize. I find it's useful to instead think about how there are 25 cafeterias inside the factory, and you just have to understand that some of these cafeterias seat up to 10,000 people. So now, you just need to visualize a cafeteria that seats up to 10,000 people. I'll wait. No, really, I'll wait. You know what you can try? Try visualizing a cafeteria from your youth, maybe one from grade school, maybe one you went to hundreds and hundreds of times against your will. That would be appropriate. Summon it up in your mind. All right, now hold it in your mind. All right, now what I want you to do is start pushing the walls outward. Start cloning the space like a Photoshop tool, over and 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 over until it holds 10,000 people. Now I want you to imagine 25 rooms, all of that size, all next to each other. And now imagine them always full, because they always are. If you're late from your shift, even one little bit, you're not getting any dinner. And I get to the main gates, and I get out of the taxi with my translator, and the first thing I see at the gates are the guards. The guards look pissed. They look really pissed. And I turn just in time to see my taxi pulling away. And I'm reminded involuntarily of this Google News alert that popped into my inbox just a few weeks earlier. It was about a Reuters photographer who was taking pictures, not at the Foxconn plant, but near the Foxconn plant. And Foxconn security scooped him up and beat him before releasing him. I hope they're in a better mood today. And I look up past the gates and the guards. I look up at these buildings, these immense buildings. They are so enormous. And along the edges of each of these enormous buildings are the nets. Because right at the time that I'm making this visit, there's been an epidemic of suicides at the Foxconn plant. Day after day, week after week, worker after worker is climbing all the way up to the tops of these enormous buildings and then throwing themselves off, killing themselves in a brutal and public fashion, not thinking very much about just how bad this makes Foxconn look. Foxconn's response to month after month of suicides has been to put up these nets. I think it's Foxconn's version of corporate responsibility. It's shift change, and the workers are coming out of the plant, and I'm standing there under the hot monsoon sun, under the gaze of these guards. I look ridiculous. I feel absurd in this landscape. I mean, I wouldn't talk to me. But Kathy surprises me. She's a spitfire. Who knows? She runs right up to the very first worker, grabs him by the arm, pulls him over to us. We start talking, and in short order, we cannot keep up. First there's one worker waiting, then two, then three. And then the guards are like, so we start backing further and further away from the plant. The line just keeps getting longer and longer. Everyone wants to talk. It's like they were coming to work every day going, you know what would be great? It'd be so great if somebody who uses all this crap that we make all the time, it'd be so great if one of them came and asked us what was going on. Because we would have stories for them. And I'm just ad hocing questions. I'm asking the questions you'd expect, like what village in China are you from? How long have you been working at Foxconn? What do you do at the plant? How do you find your job? What would you change at Foxconn if you could change anything? That last question always gets them. They always react like a bee's just flown into their face. And then they say something to Kathy, and Kathy says to me, he says he never thought of that before. Every time. Every time. And the stories are fascinating. I talked to one young woman who works on the iPhone line. She cleans the screens of the iPhones by hand in these huge racks. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them. And she shows me how she does it, and I show her my iPhone, and I hand her my iPhone. I take a picture of her holding my iPhone. And I say to her, we'll never know, but you may have cleaned the phone. You may have cleaned the screen of this very phone as it passed by you on the line. We'll never know. And quick as a whip, she takes my phone, she rubs it against her pant leg, and she hands it back, saying, there, I have cleaned it for you a second time. And stories about China often get bogged down in numbers. It all becomes so enormous that it can seem impossible. So let's talk about one story. Let's talk about one person. Let's talk about Sun Danyong. Sun Danyong was a worker at this very Foxconn plant that I'm standing in front of. He came from a village hundreds of miles to the north where his father was a stonemason, and he got a degree in electrical engineering. And there's this revolution from one generation to the other, from the father as a stonemason to the son as an electrical engineer. And there are tens, hundreds of thousands of workers with degrees like that. And they get these degrees, and they leave behind their homes and everything they know to make money that can transform their lives and the lives of everyone in the villages that they've left behind. And by all accounts, Sun Danyong was honest, brave, and true, a credit to his family. And he rose at Foxconn, and he was given an important responsibility. He was responsible for 12 iPhone prototypes. And then, one day, one of those prototypes went missing. The funny thing is, the exact same thing happens at Apple in Cupertino months later. You might have heard about it. The very same type of prototype iPhone went missing. In this case, they were testing it in the field, and a worker from Apple was at a fake German beer hall in Palo Alto drinking fake German beer, like you do. And then he leaves the iPhone prototype behind. And I think a lot of us know what that feels like. You know, you get drunk and you leave your phone behind at the bar, and there's a terrible moment of panic where it's like, oh my God, I can't text, I can't tweet, I can't text anyone. And you get the black shakes and you run back to the bar. Maybe it's just me. It's a little bit different when what you've left behind is Steve Jobs' super secret surprise iPhone. Ooh. When that happens and the tech sites get their claws into it and they rip it apart and they put it up online like a porno mag, and everyone in the world is going, iPhone, iPhone, iPhone. And the surprise is ruined. Steve's surprise is ruined. Imagine what it must have been like for that worker on Monday morning. See him in your mind, sitting in his cubicle. Oh, his co-workers, they've shunned him already, saying, you're dead to us. They won't even look at him because he is fucking dead, because they can feel the air pressure changing. They're like the rabbits in Watership Down. They know that he is coming. He's walking towards them. Step by step, the walls are warping.
wrapping around him. It's like the Matrix as he gets closer and closer. And when he walks in the room, he's even gonna have to look at this motherfucker. His head's just gonna split open and green fire's gonna come shooting out. It'll be very Raiders of the Lost Ark.
That is hyperbole. That is a literary technique known as hyperbole. That does not literally occur. In fact, nothing at all happens to that worker. Nothing at all. He doesn't even lose his job. Scout's honor. It goes a little differently for Sun Dan-young. He is beaten and interrogated for 12 continuous hours, and at the end of that time, Foxconn security tells him he'll be turned over to Chinese authorities in the morning. He knows what that means. It means he's going to prison for years and years, possibly for the rest of his life. And he leaves that room, and he walks across the bright sunlit quad of Foxconn to the public computer terminals. He logs in, and he posts to a bulletin board to tell his friends what has happened. And that's why we have this story, you know? That's why we have this little electronic trace. Most of them leave nothing behind at all, nothing at all. Foxconn is very thorough. They have a sanitation team to take care of just this sort of thing. They go around with sums of money that would seem inconsequential to us, but are huge there, and they are tied to very binding non-disclosure agreements. Sun's fiancée will be given a MacBook for her trouble and her silence. And then he starts the long walk up to the top of his apartment building far from the gates of Foxconn, and what must it have been like there at the end? Can we even imagine? I don't think we can. I think this is precisely where imagination fails. Because we, in this room, we have so many options. We are drunk with options. Look around you. Look at us. We could do anything. We are so free. Imagine him standing there, his entire world diminishing down to a line, down to a point. Imagine in one day coming to a place where this is truly his last best option, his best choice. To take that last step off. Xerox PARC, PARC, Palo Alto Research Center, is a think tank, and as a think tank, it is a place where ideas go to die. Because in order for an idea to thrive, it needs to be transmitted from person to person. You keep ideas locked up, they're like fish in a fish tank. They don't fucking like it. And at Xerox PARC, they had some amazing ideas. They just didn't know what to do with them. They'd be like, oh my God, that is amazing, that thing you made. You know what you should do with that thing? You should take that thing and you should put it in that closet over there. And pretty soon they filled up all their closets and they still didn't know what to do. So they decided that they would have an open house. And they started having all these open houses. They started inviting everyone from Silicon Valley to come and be like, hey, open house at our place this weekend. We got some crazy shit up in here. And there'll be Doritos. And people came, and people from Apple came. And they saw something in one of those closets that blew their minds. And they went back to Steve Jobs and they said, Steve, you gotta see this thing we saw at Xerox PARC, man. You gotta go. And Steve Jobs said, no. Because one of the ways that Steve Jobs organized the universe was that he divided the universe, everyone in it, into geniuses and bozos. And there were just a handful of geniuses, and there were a load of bozos. And currently, everyone who was offering this suggestion to Steve was a bozo. So it takes a while until someone who is currently a genius says to him, Steve, seriously, you gotta go to Xerox PARC, man. You gotta see this thing we saw. At which point, Steve Jobs says, I have an idea. I think we should go to Xerox PARC. I think something may be happening there. And what they saw in that room will not seem amazing to you because you live in the world that came after, but I would ask you tonight to try. Try and see it the way they saw it. Try and see it with fresh eyes. They go into this room, there's a computer there, it looks normal, it's off. There is one new thing. There's a box with a cord coming out of it. They call it a mouse. That's not the crazy part. The crazy part is when they turn that computer on, because before this moment, up until this moment, the dominant metaphor in computing was that a computer fundamentally was an electronic typewriter. People didn't think about that very often because sometimes it's hard to see the metaphor you're embedded in from the inside of it. But fundamentally, every computer was a typewriter that happened to be electronic until now. They turn on this computer and, oh, it's not a fucking typewriter. Instead it's got windows and a cursor. And it's an amazing thing to be there at the moment that the metaphor shifts. Those of you who love technology the way that I do, you know what I'm talking about. That moment where you can feel the ground going out from underneath your feet, and you know you'll never see things the same way again. And Steve Jobs leaves that room a changed man, and he goes back to Apple, and he starts putting together a team, Ocean's 11 style. He starts taking all these people from all these different groups, stealing all the freaks and the weirdos and the misfits, all the very best people from all these different groups, he steals them, and he puts all the weirdos together in a secret base. He rents this building away from the Apple campus. Nobody knows what the fuck is going on there. And he puts the weirdos on the secret base, and then he decides that secrecy is overrated. And he puts a big pirate flag right on the top of the base, as if to say, "Arr, fuck all y'all." And he tells them, your job is to destroy Apple. Your job is to destroy the Apple that exists today. And he is serious, because Steve Jobs was always the enemy of nostalgia. He understood that the future requires sacrifice. Steve Jobs was never afraid to knife the baby. I'll give you an example. A couple years ago, Apple's best-selling product, was the iPod Mini. It was an iPod, but it was mini. Everyone loved the iPod Mini. And then one day, Steve Jobs is making one of his fabulous keynotes, and he's saying, today, the iPod Mini is no more. And people were like, no! Don't hurt us, Steve! Don't take it away! We'll be good! We'll be good! Instead, we give you the iPod Nano. Yay! iPod Nano! It's smaller than the Mini! It's exactly what I wanted! I'm going to lose it even faster now. Everyone's delighted, and Steve flies away in his black helicopter, and the tech press is jizzing all over themselves. It's a magical day. And later, people are talking to the Apple reps, and they're saying, my God, the iPod Nano! iPod Nano, wow, it's smaller and thinner, and it holds even more songs than the iPod Mini. And the Apple reps were like, actually it doesn't hold more songs. People were like, well, the iPod Nano, it's smaller and thinner, and it holds just as many songs as the iPod Mini. And the Apple reps go, actually it's a lot less. People were like, well, that sucks. Hey, you still think I could get an iPod Mini? No! They've been pulled from the store shelves that very evening. You cannot have one for love or for money. You will have an iPod Nano and you won't fucking like it! Now I ask you, can you think of any other company in the world who behaves anything like this? That they would take their best-selling product, pull it from the store shelves overnight, replacing it with a product that's more technologically advanced but does half as much, and when people complain about it, they are told vigorously to go fuck themselves. I'm saying it's kind of radical. And so Steve Jobs is serious when he's telling this group of people that he wants them to destroy Apple. The Apple of that time is built on the Apple II platform. Their whole empire is built on that. And Steve Jobs is saying, no, don't be compatible with that. Fuck that shit. Shove it off the table. Make something new. And these are the people who go on to create the Macintosh. And in 1984, the Mac is born. It goes on to be the dominant computer of its generation, never in market share. The Macintosh never dominates in market share. What the Macintosh does dominate in is mind share. Over time, every computer that is not a Mac evolves until it thinks and looks and works like a Mac. My favorite Mac was the Macintosh SE30. I never owned one, but they had one at the security office where I did work study in college, and I would sign up for overnight shifts so I could spend more time with the SE30. It was a wonderful machine. It had the form factor of the original Macintosh, so if you were seated at it and you squinted, it looked like a little anthropomorphic human face was staring back at you, and I would type into its tiny grayscale screen. It was the first computer that I used regularly that had real networking. And I would telnet out from it to repositories of information all over the world. And I would post to bulletin boards. And people from other cities, other countries would post back. And we would talk about the future and how in the future this web that was just starting now, it would grow and grow until one day it would touch everyone, everywhere. And when that happened, information would be free. And people everywhere would be free. We were very young. But we could have been right. And Steve Jobs was many things, but he was two things, above all others, inextractably welded together. He was a visionary asshole. And you cannot have one without the other. The two things speak to one another. He was an impossible manager. I would not wish on my worst enemy to be personally managed by Steve Jobs. He was not a micromanager. He was a nano-manager. He would crawl into the bodies of his subordinates and try to move them around with his mind. The head of the Macintosh project, when asked for public comment about Steve Jobs' management style, the only thing he would ever say publicly was, he would make a most excellent king of France. But it's working for him. It is! The only people who are just a little tired of this bullshit is Apple's board of directors. They're just a little tired of this bullshit. They're just like, oh my God, I know he's a genius. I just wish sometimes at meetings he would stop cursing at us. I just wish sometimes at these meetings he would wear shoes. So they came up with an idea. They thought, what if we had someone next to Steve? Someone who is a little older, someone who doesn't freak out the investors quite so much, someone who looks good in a suit, someone who wears shoes. And so they convinced Steve to do this, and Steve and the board go out looking for someone, and who they find is Scully, a man who is such a historical footnote that he's very difficult to Google image. Of course, we are talking about John Scully. Thank you. And Scully was at Pepsi. And Scully didn't know fuck all about computers, but he did look good in a suit. And so Jobs goes to Scully and he says, come, join me at Apple. And Scully goes, I don't know about the clicky, I don't know. And Jobs goes, what? Do you want to sell fucking sugar water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to change the world? And he locks in with Steve Jobs' laser vision death. And Scully goes, change the world, change the world. And he goes and he joins Jobs at Apple. And everything is great. For a while. And that's a common thread in Steve Jobs' stories. Everything is great for a while. And then Scully makes the inevitable slide from genius to bozo. And Jobs realizes he needs to throw him out of the company. And so Jobs stages a coup d'etat. And the thing about staging a coup d'etat is you really want it to work. Because if it doesn't, ooh, so awkward in the office the next day. And the board backs Scully, and in short order, Jobs is thrown out of his own company. He's a laughingstock in Silicon Valley. The metaphor had shifted right out from underneath him. Emboldened by my success at Foxconn, I decide to embark on a new plan, but I'm going to need Kathy's help if it's going to work. So I'm talking with her in the lobby of my hotel, and I say to her, Kathy, now you work with a lot of American businessmen, don't you? And she says, yes, I do. And I say, great, here's what I want you to do. I want you to call all of the factories that you have connections with. I want you to call them, and I want you to tell them that I am an American businessman, and that I am interested in buying whatever it is they're selling. And she listens to this and she says, but you are not a businessman? I said, that's true, Kathy. I'm not a businessman. She says, and you are not going to buy their products? I said, that's right, Kathy, I'm not going to buy their products. She says, you will lie to them. I say, yes, Kathy. I'm going to lie to lots and lots of people. And for a moment, I think it's not going to work. But then you can actually see the idea leap the synaptic gap from problem to be solved. She says, you are going to need a lot of business cards. And 2 days later, we head out into the factory zone, and as we come to each factory, Kathy briefs me on what it is they make and what it is I have said that I'm going to buy. Factories are all different, but really, they're more similar than different. You know, you got the gates and the guards, and then you get past those. You get to this, you walk in, it's this huge lawn, just this huge expanse of grass. Nobody walks on it, nobody uses it. You cross the huge lawn, and you go into the lobbies, and these lobbies are these huge, empty, Kubrickian spaces, totally empty, except for a tiny little desk at the other side of the hall. So you cross this gigantic lobby to this tiny little desk where you introduce yourself to the receptionist. And then the executives always come down in a gaggle, all together. They scoop you up. And then you go up together to a conference room for the exchanging of the business cards. And Kathy had told me this would be very important. She said it would be very formal, and when we got in that room, each person would come up to me in turn, and they would offer me their business card with two hands, and it was very important that I accept it with two hands, and that I then examine it. Lucida Grande, excellent font choice. And after each and every one of them have done this, they are all staring at me, because it's my turn. And I reach into my pocket, and I pull out some grimy slips of fucked up paper, because it is so hard to find a Kinko's in Shenzhen. And the business office at my hotel, it's like from before the fucking revolution, and the woman there is totally scary, and of course the keyboard doesn't make any fucking sense, and the paper is all slimy and gray, and there's no scissors, they're like child safety. It's so fucked up. I don't even know how to tell you how fucked up it was. It's really fucked up. And so I take my fucked up piece of paper and I go, thank God for the protocol of the Chinese. They do not even blink. They reach up, they take it with two hands, and they go, interesting made-up business name with fake address. And then it's time for the PowerPoint. And one of the the reasons that I have lived my life in the manner that I have is so that I do not have to go to fucking PowerPoint presentations. That was sort of the fucking point of all of this. But life has its little ironies, doesn't it, sometimes? And I made up for it in Shenzhen. Oh, yes I did. Because I went to all the PowerPoint presentations, every last one of them. Because PowerPoint is a tool designed by Microsoft. Microsoft! Whose motto should be, building tools that do shit we can already do. Because the point of PowerPoint is that it enables people who are in the same room to communicate with one another. And I think we can see by the form of my theatrical presentation, we already have a tool that can do that just fine. It's called the human voice. It's built in, and it hardly ever crashes. But why would we want to talk to each other when we can use PowerPoint with all its fucking features? Like the clip art. Oh god, the clip art makes my eyes bleed. And the fonts. They use all the fucking fonts. Comic Sans. There's nothing comic about Comic Sans. If you take one thing home with you tonight, let it be that. So they put up the first slide, all right? And it's got a big JPEG on it that's all pixelated, like somebody smacking me in the retina with a ball-peen hammer. And then the guy running the PowerPoint presentation goes, click. And a single line of text appears in English, and it says, the plant uses 30,000 gallons of water every day. There's a pause, and then the clicker says, the plant uses 30,000 gallons of water every day. And then, nothing happens unless and until I have to manually nod. I have to literally go, And then, and only then, will he click. And then another line of text appears. It's fucking interminable. It goes on and on. I swear to God, there are still nights I wake up in the middle of the night going, oh, is the presentation still going on? Am I missing it? Oh, fuck. It goes on for so long that I seriously start thinking about the fact that I'm an actor playing the role of an American businessman. There are actual business people out there for whom this is their actual life. How does that happen to somebody? You go to school, you fall in love, and this is what you're wasting your precious life on? What the fuck happened to you? They must have a penknife in their pocket, you know? Just to rub it, just for luck, as the slides are going by. Just rubbing the penknife, just rubbing it, you know, rubbing that penknife for luck. Just watching the slides going by, rubbing the penknife. And if it ever gets to be too much, you know, if it ever just gets to be just a little too fucking much, they can just stab themselves in the neck over and over with it, and then it'll be over. Worst job in the fucking world. After the PowerPoint, we head down to the factory floor, and I retract my previous assertion, because this is the worst job in the fucking world. Industrial spaces with 20, 25, 30,000 workers in a single enormous space, they can exert a kind of eerie fascination. There's a beauty to industrialization on such a massive scale, you don't have to deny it. There's a wonder to seeing so much order laid out before you. And the people are walking around, and your minders are whispering statistics into your ear, and it's easy to fall into kind of a Stalinist wet dream. And I try to counteract that by locking onto individual faces as they take me up and down the lines. And the first thing I notice is the silence. It is so quiet. At Foxconn, you're demerited if you ever speak on the line. And in no factory I went to did anyone ever speak on the line. But this is deeper than that. As a creature of the first world, I expect a factory making complex electronics to have the sound of machinery. But in a place where the cost of labor is effectively zero, anything that can be made by hand is made by hand. Rest assured, no matter how complex your electronics are, they were assembled by thousands and thousands of tiny little fingers working in concert, and in those vast spaces the only sound is the sound of bodies in constant, unending motion, and it is constant. They work a Chinese hour, and a Chinese hour has 60 Chinese minutes, and a Chinese minute has 60 Chinese seconds. I mean, it's not like our hour. What's our hour now? 43, 44 minutes? You have a bathroom break? Smoke break? You don't smoke, you have a yoga break? This doesn't look anything like that. This looks like nothing we've seen in a century. They work on the lines, and a line only moves as fast as its slowest member. So each person learns how to move perfectly, as quickly as possible. And if they can't do it, there are people behind them watching them, and there are cameras watching both sets of people, and people watching the cameras. They lock it down. They sharpen it to a fine, sharp edge every hour, and those hours are long. The official workday in China is 8 hours long. That's a joke. I never even heard of anyone who even heard of working an 8-hour day. They work 12-hour days standard, sometimes longer than that. Sometimes 14 hours a day, 15 hours a day. Sometimes when there's a hot new gadget coming out, you know what the fuck I mean? Then it pegs up to 16 hours a day, and it just sits there for days and weeks, months and months of straight 16, sometimes longer than that. While I'm in country, a worker at Foxconn dies after working a 34-hour shift. I wish I could say that's unusual, but it's happened before. I only mention it because it actually happened while I was there. And many of them live in dormitories right at the factories. They're often cement cubes, 12 foot by 12 foot, and in that space there are beds stacked up like Jenga puzzle pieces all the way to the ceiling. The space between them is so narrow, none of us would actually fit in there. You have to slide into them like coffins. There are cameras in the hallway. There are cameras everywhere, and why wouldn't there be? You know, when we dream of a future when the regulations are washed away and the corporations are finally free to sail above us, you don't have to dream about some sci-fi dystopian Blade Runner 1984 bullshit. You can go to Shenzhen tomorrow. They're making your shit that way today. And you need to know that these people are among the best and brightest of their generation. You need to know that when I interview them outside the factories, they are, each of them, as bright and individual as you out there in the darkness. You need to know that these are exactly the people who fought their way out of the villages to make a new life for themselves in these cities. These are exactly the kind of people who might have the spirit to think about democracy. But fortunately for Beijing, there's a heat sink. In the south of the country, there's an economic honey trap that soaks up all of these people and keeps them busy. Too busy to think about freedom. Too busy making all of our shit. And when I leave the factories, I can feel the metaphor shifting out from underneath me. I can feel myself being rewritten from the inside out. Everything I look at, everything I see, the way I see everything is starting to change. I keep thinking, how often do we talk about how we wish things were more handmade? Oh, we talk about that all the time, don't we? Oh, I wish it was like the old days. I wish more things had that human touch. But that's not true. There are more handmade things now than there have ever been in the history of the world. Everything is handmade. I know. I've seen it. I've seen the workers laying in parts thinner than a human hair, one after another. After another. Everything is handmade if you have the eyes to see it. At this point, Apple and the people at Apple, they're excited about Scully. They think, yeah, maybe it's time for Apple to be a grown-up company. What they don't understand is that while Steve Jobs is a bit of a megalomaniacal asshole and also a little bit of a brutal tyrant, he's also the glue that's been holding the company together. And as soon as he leaves, it's only then that people at Apple realize realize that Apple is full of mad geniuses, thousands and thousands of mad geniuses. And as soon as Steve Jobs is out the door, whoa, they're all going, finally, my plan will come to fruition. I will finally be able to mate a monkey and a pony. And Scully, what's Scully doing? Scully is walking up and down the halls going, hey, does anybody need to ship anything? Anybody? You need to ship anything? UPS? FedEx? No. Ship? No. All right. Well, just let me know if you need to ship anything. I'll be in my office, drinking a Pepsi. And all the rigor goes out of the place, and things start getting really weird really fast. And pet projects that should stay small start getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger because there's no one there to knife the baby. Like that time that Apple tried to create its own version of the internet. Yeah, that didn't go too well. Or, most famously, the Newton. And the Newton is a tale of heartbreak for the ages because the Newton was a fantastic machine. The Newton was a personal electronic organizer, and when you tell people that, they're like, what do you mean, like the Palm Pilot? No, fuck the Palm Pilot. The Palm Pilot was made of Legos and bullshit. The Newton was a fantastic machine. The Newton could actually understand your fucking handwriting. You write whatever you want. Write whatever you want. And it put it right in the address book, in the calendar. It was the future in your hands, except it didn't work. And they tried. Oh my God, they tried and they delayed it and they delayed it and they delayed it and then they finally ship it. And all the Apple faithful run out, oh, my precious. And they take it home and they say, honey, look here, look. I got the future in my hand. Watch this. Doctor's appointment at 2 p.m. tomorrow. And the Newton says, no, that isn't what I wrote. It's embarrassing. I don't know why the future isn't working. Maybe it's me. Because in this, Apple users are a little bit like battered wives. They blame themselves. I can change my handwriting so that the Newton likes it. I know we can have a relationship. I've got to make it work. Doctor's appointment at 2 p.m. tomorrow. And the Newton says, ugh. This is the era of the PowerBook 5300. The flaming PowerBook. I don't mean that your laptop gets warm or it gets hot. I mean actual fucking fire comes out of the keyboard! Your laptop bursts into flames! They recall them all. They replace the batteries. Now they do not burst into flames, but they only get 17 minutes of battery life. This is the era where on Apple's early internet website, they have an actual approved troubleshooting tech note telling users to take the affected machine, hold it 6 inches above a table, and drop it. Doesn't inspire confidence. At this point, Apple is fucked. I mean, no tech company in the history of the world has ever come back from a deficit like this. And Wired Magazine actually does an entire article called The Death of Apple. And these prominent tech pundits come together and they write obituaries, mourning the fact that Apple is gone. And Apple is in the humiliating position of having to release a press release saying, oh, no, everything's great, everything's fine, no, don't worry about it. And it's like a Viking funeral where the Vikings going, oh, I think I'm all right. And everyone's like, no, you're not. And they push the barge onto the water and they set it on fire. And at this point, the unlikeliest savior appears. Apple asks Steve Jobs to come back. And if you're like me, wouldn't you have loved to have heard that phone call? I think it might have gone something like this. Hey, Steve, how's it going? Yeah, good to talk to you. Yeah, it's been about 12 years, right? Yeah, 12. Since we threw you out of the company, that's right. But you've been busy. Yeah, no, we've been busy too. Yeah, right. Running the company into the ground. That's right, Steve, that's right. Look, listen, Steve, the board has asked me to call you to ascertain if you'd be interested in the possibility of... Hey, Steve, you still there? Yeah, we dropped out. Yeah, AT&T, right? Listen, the board has asked me to call you to ascertain if you'd be interested in the possibility. Will you please come back and save the company? Thank you. I hope you enjoyed our blocking for this evening. Because each side has exactly what the other side needs. Apple needs Jesus fucking Christ, but he is not available, so Steve Jobs will have to do. They also need a working next generation operating system, because while they were busy pissing away hundreds of millions of dollars trying to mate a manatee and a walrus, they forgot to make a working next generation operating system. Meanwhile, Steve Jobs, in his years in exile, has actually created his own computer company in his own image, Next Computers. And Next Computers sort of embodies everything that is both fabulous and frustrating about Steve Jobs. It's sort of like a narcissism supernova of Jobsian id. On the fabulous side, the operating system is amazing. It's the world's first object-oriented operating system. It is literally 10 years ahead of its time. The thing about things that are 10 years ahead of their time is that they are 10 years ahead of their time. So they're not compatible with fuck all that you're using today. On the frustrating side, this is Stephen P. Jobs, a man who does not know the meaning of the word compromise. His idea of a reasonable computer to break into the crowded computer market of the late 80s was the Next Cube, which is a solid black cube of milled magnesium. It is a triumph of industrial design. It is compatible with none of your peripherals, it can run none of your software, and it costs $14,000. It doesn't do very well. It really doesn't do very well. And at this point, Next has no assets of which to speak, except for a kick-ass next-generation operating system. And so Apple acquires Next, but in reality it feels a little bit more like tiny little Next somehow swallows up Apple. Steve Jobs comes back, and in one of his first orders of business, he makes some subtle changes to the board of directors so that this shit will never happen again. Then he installs his lieutenants to take control, and he interviews everyone at Apple looking for diamonds in the rough, and this is how he finds Jonathan Ive, a junior industrial designer, and he promotes him up, and a new order begins to take hold. The Mac OS, with its smiling Mac face and its friendly error messages, they take it out behind the barn, they shoot it in the back of the head, and they dump its body into a ditch. And then they take the Next operating system, which, as I told you, was 10 years ahead of its time. Well, it's 10 years later, so it's right on schedule. And they transplant it into the heart of the Mac, and it becomes the Mac OS X. It becomes the operating system that all of Apple's devices run on today. And a new Apple begins to rise. An Apple that's more design-driven, more focused, more ruthless, more elegant, more secretive. The old Apple was practically an open shop. You know, if you wanted to know what was going on, you just asked somebody and they'd tell you. Now, the gates are closed. No one knows what the fuck is going on there in Cupertino. It's like Willy Wonka after Slugworth. And then little devices start coming out, like that the old Apple never would have thought of. Lifestyle devices, like little boxes that play all of your music. And they're compatible with both Macs and PCs. And they spread like a halo around the world, changing people's ideas of what Apple is as a company. And when Jobs showed us the iPhone, those of us who follow technology could feel here was the metaphor shifting again. Here was the new thing. Gone was the cursor. Gone was the windowing interface. It was so simple, even a child could use it. But the changes go much deeper than that. Every device that runs on that touch interface is locked down. You will never touch that operating system. That belongs to Apple and Apple alone. You will never install your own programs on those machines. Instead, you will download them from Apple's servers, and Apple will decide what is available and will take a healthy cut from each and every proceeding. Unless you jailbreak those devices, you will never truly own them. And a walled garden begins to rise up around all the Apple users who frolic and play, and a new deal is struck between Apple and its users. And the terms of the new deal are, we are Apple! Have we not always given you the very finest devices? Have we not always given you the best user experience? We did that because we have exquisite taste. We have exquisite taste, and you do not. We are going to protect you from your taste. But let's be clear, you are going to love what's coming next, but we are going to shut this shit down once and for all. This is the end of the garage. This is the end of hacking your own shit. This is the end of Wozniak, and this is the rise of the consumer, and that will be your job. You will consume. You will drink from Apple servers. It will be a new virtuous circle between each of you and the corporate entity that is Apple. And with each app you download, you will be bound ever more tightly. But you will not leave. Why would you leave? They are the very finest devices in the world, are they not? You will use them, and you will love them. You will love them, and they will own you. I'm at a restaurant in the factory zone, seated at a table with Kathy, and this aphorism keeps running through my head. I don't remember where I heard it or who said it first, but it's, paranoia is not paranoia when they're actually out to get you. And I go through my checklist again. I've gone through my pockets and I found every slip of paper with an email address or a phone number, and I've destroyed all of those. I've hidden all my paper notes off of my person, and I've erased everything on my laptop, and anything I can't erase is on an encrypted partition, which I hope is encrypted enough. And I've done all of these things because I'm at a restaurant to meet with a union, because there are unions in China. There are those who are the fronts for the Communist Party, and then there are actual unions interested in labor reform. They're called secret unions. Because in China, if you're caught being a member of or affiliating with a group like that, you go to prison. You go to prison for many years, and that is why I've had to take these precautions. And getting this meeting involved climbing a ladder of associations, going to meeting after meeting, just every step of the way, just making good my intentions, just being clear that I'm a storyteller. I just want to hear people's stories. I just want to hear what they have to say. And the union organizers come in and sit down, and it's awkward at first, and they tell me about the 2 Honda plants that have gone on strike in the north of the province. And I think about what it would mean to go on strike in a country where even being a member of a union can get you thrown in prison. What it would take to be pushed to that point. And I say to them, how do you know who's right to work with you? How do you find people to help you organize, to do what you do? And this sort of breaks the narrative, and they look at each other kind of bashfully, and they say, well, we have a lot of meetings, and we talk a lot, and we meet at coffee houses, we exchange papers, sometimes there are books. And it's so clear in this moment that they are making it up as they go along. The way so many of us do. The way pirates do, the way rebels do, the way, the crazy people who change the world do. They make it up as they go along. And then the workers start coming in. They come in one after another, and we talk. We talk about the things I've been talking about my entire time here in Hong Kong and Shenzhen, like hexane. Hexane is an iPhone screen cleaner. It's great because it evaporates just a little bit faster than alcohol does, which means that you can then run the production line even faster and try to keep up with those quotas. The only problem is that hexane is a potent neurotoxin, and hundreds in the north have been exposed. Their hands shake uncontrollably. Most of them can't even pick up a glass. We talk about people who work on the line doing the same motion hundreds of thousands of times. It's like carpal tunnel on a scale we can scarcely imagine. And people want me to know that this is eminently avoidable. If people were just rotated monthly, just given a different job every month on the line, this would not happen. But that would require someone to care. And so when you start working at 15 or 16, by the time you're 26, 27, your hands are ruined. And when they are truly ruined, when they will not do anything further, well, you know what you do with a defective part in a machine that makes machines. You throw it away. And the thing that unites all of these people is that they're all the kind of people who would join a union. In a place where joining a union can ruin your life. I talked to one woman, very bird-like, nervous, and she just wants to explain to me how it is she came to be in a union, because she never thought she'd be in a union. It's just she couldn't get her company to pay her overtime. And she complained, and this went on for weeks and months. And then Kathy interrupts. She says kind of sharply, "Why didn't you go to the labor board? That's what they're there for. You should have complained to the labor board." And the woman goes, I did complain to the labor board. And they took my name and my address and my company, and they took my name and they put it on the blacklist. And they fired me. And then she shows me a copy of the blacklist. A friend of hers in accounting photocopied it and snuck it out to her. She gives it to me. I hand it to Kathy to translate. In a fascist country run by thugs, you don't have to be subtle. You can say exactly what you fucking mean. The sheet is very clear. It says right across the top, the following is a list of troublemakers. If any of them are found in your employ, dismiss them immediately. And then there's column after column after column of names, page after page after page of them. Kathy's hand trembles as she translates it. I talked to an older woman with an older worker, actually, a man with leathery skin. His right hand is twisted up. It was maimed in some machinery. He says he didn't receive any medical attention, and it healed this way. And then when he went back to work, he was too slow, and they fired him. Today he works at a woodworking plant. He says he likes it better. He says the people are nicer, and that the hours are more reasonable. He works about 70 hours a week. And I hear these stories all day long. But why believe me? I am, after all, a noted fabulist. Perhaps none of this is true. Wouldn't that be comforting? Perhaps your electronics were made by Oompa Loompas, a benighted tribe of Oompa Loompas, saved by saintly Steve Jobs, and they work in beautifully apportioned factories. And each of these Oompa Loompas actually has a severe case of OCD. So they actually love assembling tiny little electronics the same way, the same exact way, over and over and over again. It's working out wonderfully. You don't have to believe me. You could believe the New York Times. 2 years after I'm there, they find things I never could have dreamed of. Like they find workers at Foxconn regularly working double shifts. That's 24 continuous hours until they drop on the line. They find Apple's quota so unbelievably tight that iPad factories are pressed into production before the factory is even finished being built. They're rushing to get them into Apple stores for launch day. That's how the first iPad factory explodes, killing several workers and maiming others. Apple apologizes. Foxconn apologizes. This will never happen again. Until it happens again, the exact same way at another iPad factory 3 months later. When NPR investigates that explosion, they discover that Apple inspected that factory the very morning it exploded, an official inspection that lasted all of 10 minutes. You don't have to believe me. In fact, let me tell you about a lie. woven into the fabric of this monologue. I told you earlier about the pictures that made me want to learn more about Shenzhen. That's true. But there's a lie of omission just after that, as you will come to discover, the most dangerous kind of lie. I didn't just suddenly go immediately to China. I mean, what am I, crazy? What do you think I did? I am a red-blooded first worlder. I Googled. You remember Google, our second brain? The one that confirms all of our biases? I Googled, and what do you think I found? I found prominent, reliable, verifiable NGO reports going back a decade detailing far more hideous shit than what we've been talking about tonight at Foxconn in the Special Economic Zone. I mean, when are we going to grow up? We do know that every year, most of the Christmas lights that we hang on our trees, those were made by Chinese prison labor. We do know that, right? And I don't have to tell you how much worse Chinese prison labor is, do I? None of this is news. It never was. What's news is why we don't care. Because I assure you, we do not care. In fact, we will do anything not to care. We will do anything to make a world, to shape a metaphor, so that we will not see these things. We do not want to see them. And it is an ignorance. It is an ignorance. Ignorance is a gift you only get to give yourself once. And there's no one out there in the darkness, in the reach of my voice, no one sitting out there watching me now, who came into this room tonight thinking, China is a worker's paradise. You knew. You always knew, just as I knew, before I saw the reports lit up on the glass of my laptop. We've always known. And that's the lie. That's the lie that binds us, the lie that compels us to shape the metaphor, to erase whatever we must, take whatever excuses we can find, and bend them to excuse ourselves. Anything so that we don't have to see it. Because we don't like what it says about us. We don't want to see how everything we touch, everything we own and wear and use has had hundreds of hands on it, touching us. And those hands are tied to us by a coin whose currency we refuse to recognize. Until we see it, we will never know ourselves. And until we know it, we will never be free. 8 months after I leave China, I'm at another restaurant on the other side of the world in Berkeley, California. I'm sitting across the table from Steve Wozniak. And they say to never meet your heroes, and I can understand that because Mr. Wozniak had seen this monologue that you are listening to right now a few nights earlier, and it had occurred to me that it might be potentially libelous, the way that I was portraying him as an autistic bear. Fortunately, the laws of libel are very clear in this country, and they require falsehood. And Steve Wozniak is an autistic bear. A bright, bold, brilliant, geekish, autistic bear. And he is seated across the table from me, wearing the ceremonial vestments of the geek. He is wearing a utilivest. There are so many pockets in this fucking vest. I swear to God, there are 50 pockets, and that is not hyperbole. And he is taking a cell phone out of each and every motherfucking pocket. Yeah, he has, I shit you not, 7 cell phones. And he's laying them all out in front of me, one after the other, and he's explaining very earnestly why if we all had the resources that he has, the only logical way to go through life is with 7 cell phones. He's got 2 iPhones, one Verizon and one AT&T. And you know, I can understand that because I have an AT&T iPhone, and it is almost like not having an iPhone at all. Sometimes when I want to make certain that someone gets a text message from me, I'll actually type in the text, and then I'll just throw the phone at the person who needs to receive it. It's the only way to be sure. He has the latest Droid, a Nokia number. He lays them out all next to each other, and they look like the backs of the cards of the tarot, because Apple has won this virtual war of ideas as well. Each is a mysterious black glass rectangle. And they are all made the same way at the same factory. by the same hands. And I was concerned because Mr. Wozniak was supposed to meet me after the show, and instead he ran away. Generally not a good sign. But as we sat down at that table, he explained to me that he was overwhelmed after the show, and he found himself weeping. And he left the theater and he drove. He drove up into the high hills of Berkeley, where those plants flower all year long and make their strange smells in the night. He drove around the old campus. He drove around the landscape of his youth, of all of our youths, because this is where it happened. This is where men and women in garages and computer clubs created the architecture of the world we live in today. And he is so emotionally open as he is sitting in front of me at this table. There are tears welling up in his eyes. And he says to me, "It was never supposed to be this way. It never was. We should do something. Somebody should do something." He says it like nobody ever thought of it before. He says it almost naively, as if it's a new idea. And maybe it is a new idea. Maybe we never have made that synaptic leap from a problem to a problem to be solved. Maybe we've never taken the terrible weight of it in our hands and truly felt what we've made and then finally begun to lift. He's an excellent conversationalist. He converses in the way that geeks do, with branching patterns and multiple strands that he goes back and forth between. I can barely keep up. He's making a specific point about the nature of programming that I can't possibly understand. And while I'm listening to him, I find myself thinking that in a sense, he is my father. Because he's the last one. He's the last one who really designed a computer, whole and entire. The Apple II was his design. And I was introduced to these mysteries by that machine. He gave me a tool, and with that tool, I discovered an entire world. That tool brought me to this table, talking to him. Brought me to this table, talking to you. His hands move as he speaks. They are large and ursine and incredibly expressive, and he outlines and indicates everything he's saying precisely, shaping each and every point. Everything has a place, and everything is in its place. They are the kind of hands you don't see around here much anymore. They are the hands of a maker. I used to hear from Steve Jobs. Never directly. I don't even think he knew I would hear from him. Instead, people who have sat in the seats that you are sitting in now in theaters all over the world, sometimes after they would hear the words that you have been hearing, sometimes they would write to him. And sometimes they would CC me and BCC me, and I would see hundreds of messages flooded out to a single fixed point filled with questions. And every once in a while, an answer would come back. And sometimes they would forward those answers to me, and there were all kinds, sometimes a short, sharp word, sometimes a link, sometimes a simple line of text. Mike doesn't appreciate the complexities of the situation. And I looked on every message that came back with hope, and I would keep my head down, and I would tell my story night after night in city after city, and tonight, we know the truth. Tonight it is far larger than this piece of theater ever could have contained. You can read it in the papers, you can see it on the web, you can hear it on the radio. It is a story spreading everywhere that will not hide, and it is so much more. We now know that the people at Apple turned their backs on their workers a long time ago, and they squeezed their margins so tightly that they made much of what you have heard tonight worse. And they made themselves the most profitable company in the history of the world, a very large part of why they were given this designation. And Steve Jobs' genius of design and form blinded himself to the most essential law of design, that the way in which a thing is made is part of the design itself. He forgot that, and so did I, but you won't. You won't forget that, because tonight is a virus. It started in the first scene, but you couldn't feel it. And by the third scene, it had jumped your firewalls, and it's been leaping from protected memory to protected memory all night long. It's been rewriting your code from the inside out. And I'm letting you know now, you will never be rid of it. It is inside of you, just like it is inside of me, twisting and wriggling. And when these lights come up, when this theatrical construct falls away, it will still be in you. You will carry it out these doors. You will be vectors for it. You will carry it to your homes. And when you sit down in front of your laptops, when you open them up, you will see the blood welling up between the keys. You will know that they were made by human hands. You will always know that. When you take your phones outside that check the time and the light falls across your face, or as you're driving home and you see enormous billboards covering the entire side of buildings advertising the latest Apple gadget, you will know how they were made. You will know that, and you will live with it. Just as I live with it, just as we're all going to have to start seeing it if we're going to make the shift. Tonight the door is open if you want to walk through it. Tonight we are jailbroken. Tonight we are free.